Okay, we're going to look at section 1.4. This has to do with bias in studies and how bias can be introduced or can show up in studies that we're looking at. So that you get the idea of what bias is in terms of our statistics class, if you were to want to try and estimate the percentage of Democrats that you have, and you were to estimate it using a sample of students from, say, Tyler Junior College, chances are that the particular percentage that you get may be a little higher or a little lower than the actual percentage of Democrats out of all TJC students. And that's to be expected. Now, if you were to do several samples and then average them, because some of those samples are going to be higher and some of the samples will be lower, the average percentage is probably going to be fairly close, pretty close to the actual percentage of Tyler Junior College students that are Democratic. Now, when this occurs, when you take and you do kind of an averaging of stuff, and this may be on different statistics, different numerical values for a sample, some of those, when they are done, do actually approach or get close to the actual value, the parameter that it's supposed to go with, okay? So when this happens, those are called unbiased, and we want things to be unbiased, okay? Now, if you were still looking at the percentage of Democratic students at Tyler Junior College, but let's say that there was a Democratic politician that was holding a press conference, a speech, something like that on Tyler Junior College's campus, and you went to that speech and you polled from there. Now, there would very possibly be some other political parties, Republican, Independent, non-affiliated, things like that are going to be there. But we can also assume that the percentage of Democratic students would be higher at that particular location. And so therefore, if I were to take several samples all from that particular speech location that's going on, then the percentage is probably going to be overestimated. So it's going to appear that the percentage of Democrats is a lot higher than what it actually is in reality. That is an example of bias, okay? And it's some biases we can help manage. Some biases we're not going to be able to. So bias is going to be whenever you overestimate or something is overestimated or underestimated, okay? So an example of like an underestimation would be, let's suppose that in Tyler, we have a 2% homeless population. And let's say that we started sampling and we did a couple of samples from, say, Broadway Square Mall. We did a couple of samples from the Cumberland Mall. We did some sampling from, say, some grocery stores, maybe some Walmart, something like that. And if we got out of all those, if we had 0% or maybe even 1%, when all of that's averaged, it's going to be low to the actual percentage of Tyler. So that would be another example of a biased indication for that, okay? So now, looking at a couple of ways that this is going to kind of kick in and move through. So voluntary response, we talked about these in section 1.3. In 1.3, 1.2, somewhere there. We talked about voluntary response. This is where I get to choose whether or not I'm going to participate or not. So in a voluntary response, this may be a website, a text message, tweet, a phone number. We talked about news media outlets use these a lot to get their opinions. In many cases, we talked about we get those polar opposite extreme opinions. We get the ones that are very for it or very against it. And so as a general rule, voluntary response surveys are highly biased because you're getting those two extremes, and it's going to look like that is where everybody sits in one of those two camps, and you don't have those kind of neutral middle ground, or maybe they have a moderate feeling one way or the other, but it polarizes, and we only see those very strong polarizing things. Now, another way that we get biased interest is what's called self-interest bias. Now, what's going to happen here is when they talk about, this comes up in advertisements. So print, radio, media advertisements, that claim data that shows that a particular product is better than its competitors. Okay. Now, what may happen though is that the advertiser may not report all of the data. They may be a little selective in it to show that their product. So if we had something like, let's say, car dealerships here in town, and Smith car dealership said that we've got the lowest prices in town, but they left out Spencer's, okay, or something like that. They left out that dealership as not part of the survey group because Spencer's on a couple of the cars has a lower price than Smith's. They're going to leave that out because then Smith's wouldn't have the lowest prices in town. So this is they're trying to bump up so that they can have their information and their view reflected on it, okay? So people who have an interest in the outcome of an experiment, they would have an incentive to try and do this. So if I was going to get a bonus because if I was able to show something, then I might leave some of the data out that might be counteractive or go against what I'm trying to show. Okay. So the next type is what's called social acceptability bias. For this one, people oftentimes may be reluctant to admit to behaviors that reflect negatively upon them. So, example, they may ask, did you vote in the last presidential election? Now, the thought here is if you are of an eligible age to vote, you should vote. Okay. And so the problem is with this straightforward, did you vote? People are probably they're not going to be real inclined to go, no, I didn't, because it's not considered what I should do if I were to say no. Society expects us to vote if we're eligible so that we can get our opinions heard. Same way about, did you go to a party or whatever else? Depending upon, what the implications of that may be, people may be inclined to say one answer or the other, just because, and it may or may not be true, just because they're doing what they think will be the acceptable answer. The next thing is what's called leading questions. With leading questions, this is how the questions are worded, and they imply or have you going towards a specific answer. So the two questions that are asked here are the same, about the same topic, but one of them, the vocabulary that's used in it, the choice of words that's used in it, the option for the answer choice kind of guides one way or the other. So the first one says, do you favor decreasing the heavy tax burden on middle class families? Okay, so vocabulary in here is heavy tax burden, middle class, because that's kind of where everybody sits for the most part. And then, are you in favor of decreasing that? They don't say cut it. They don't say anything. So this and your only options here to answer are yes or no. And so with this one, it would probably guide you towards saying yes. Okay. Now, the next one is, what is your opinion on decreasing taxes for middle class families? Notice they're still asking about decreasing. They're still talking about middle class families, but they have left out this heavy tax burden. Okay. Heavy and burden sounds bad. So of course we should get rid of it. So now we've got strongly agree, strongly disagree, somewhat disagree, neither agree nor disagree, somewhat agree, and strongly agree. You now have kind of a range of choices as to how you can respond to that, because you may somewhat agree with it, like, yeah, we need to do a little bit of stuff, but you may still also be okay with the way it is now, that it doesn't necessarily have to change. Okay. Then we've got what's called non-response. Okay, this is you can't make somebody answer a question. You can't make somebody send a survey back in. You can't force people to answer the phone and answer your questions. So there are going to be some people who just outright refuse to participate, and these are called non-responders or non-responses. And sometimes you do have that non-response people, the individuals, do have different opinions from the ones who do respond. And so oftentimes this can create a little bit of bias. It's also because of the fact that those non-responder opinions are being underrepresented in the overall data. Now, non-response can be counteracted a bit, okay? You can do stuff like incentives, the Nielsen surveys, which does TV ratings and things like that. They actually offer like a very small, like $2 or $3, $5, something like that to participate. So you're kind of quote unquote getting paid to do it, but you don't get the money until after you participate. If you are told, so for example, in Tyler, let's say we've got about 100,000 people here. My voice is only 1 out of 100,000. I don't think that my opinion is like going to be super influential at 1 out of 100,000 people. But if I was called and told that I was in a group of 100 people, in a survey of 100 people, what is my opinion? Now I think my voice carries some weight because I'm only 1 out of 100. And there's probably some other people that share my same opinion, but now I feel like I've got a bigger voice. And so I'd be more willing to participate in that smaller sample survey size, knowing that I'm 1 out of 100 type of thing. As far as phone calls, you can call it different times of the day, things like that. And then the last type that we have is sampling bias. And this is going to be when the way that you pull your individuals has more people, some people will be more likely, or certain types of people will be more likely or less likely to be included in that sample. So if you were doing something like, I'm going to call phone numbers out of the phone book. I'm going to tell you now, I don't have a home phone. All we have is cell phones. And so I would not be able to participate in that survey because I don't have a landline. Okay. So we look at some stuff like that. Now, let's take a look on our examples page, our worksheet page, and take a look at these questions and see what we can get here. So we've got, they want us to determine the type of bias that's being involved here. So we've got a website developer wants to determine, so we've got a website developer. So we're talking about a website here. The effectiveness of a new website design. She samples 600 people. So we've got 600 people. 22 completed. Now, since only 22 out of the 600 did this, this is a non-response. We have got a very large chunk of people who did not participate in this particular survey. Okay? Now, the next one is we've got an 80s band that wants to do a best of the best CD compilation. They publish a poll on their website and vote for their favorite 30 songs to be included. We've got 8,000 people respond. Okay. This one is going to be voluntary response. If I didn't listen to that group, if I don't care about that particular 80s band, then I'm not going to respond to that email. Okay. I'm not going to respond to their website and do that. Okay. So now, next type. We've got a car dealership. Claims they have the lowest price in town. I actually did this one in the discussion. This is going to be a self-interest one, okay? Because they're going to say that they've got the lowest stuff in town because they want to get more people. And then to determine the extent of betting in a professional sports, so we're dealing with the betting situation here. The league commissioner asked a simple random sample of 100 players if they had ever bet on their own games. 2% of players admitting to betting on their own. This is going to be social acceptance. It is going to be considered unacceptable to say that, yes, I bet on my own game or against my own team, for or against my own team. So that would be for that